We are joined by Western Carolina Athletic Director Alex Gary, a member of the Women's Basketball Committee. I'm Dave Friedman. Let's start with the really good news. From a net perspective, the Southern Conference is the best it's been in recent memory. Why?
It's a great question. I think we've got a lot of teams that are really good. We also have a lot of teams in this league that are old. We've got some mature teams. I look at my own team. We've got a bunch of young women that have been around for a long time, and with maturity becomes consistency. And I think that if you look at some of the other teams in the league, Chattanooga's got a lot of players back. Wofford's got a lot of players back. Across the board, we've got some young women that have been through this before in our league. And I think you're starting to see that in some of the competitiveness that we've seen out of conference that's led to a very competitive in-conference season. And by the way, hope you're doing well, Dave. Good to be with you.
Great to see you and hope you're doing well too. Let's talk about that non-conference piece of it. When you play each other, it's a 50-50. Someone's going to win, somebody's going to lose. It doesn't necessarily help or hurt the conference. How did the league perform out of conference?
Performed really well. The one challenging part, I think, in terms of the performance, especially when it comes to the room and what we're looking at from a team sheet perspective. The team sheets are what we use to evaluate teams that we're considering for selection in the tournament. Is we don't have a ton of quad one wins. As a matter of fact, right now we don't have any quad one or two wins in the league. Only Furman has a quad three win, and so that's a little bit challenging. While we've had some success out of the conference and had some wins, more so than maybe we have in previous years with some of our programs, some of our teams, those high level quad one and quad two wins is what's missing. So as a committee member, what we tell our conferences on a lot of our conference monitoring calls, these conferences that are really, really good, that have top net 100 teams in their leagues, is you got to go out and you got to play some better teams and beat some teams. And so far, while we've been able to play some really good competition, to win some games in the non-conference, those quad one and quad two wins aren't something that's showing up from a Southern Conference perspective on the women's side this year.
My understanding is there's some new criteria this year for seeding the women's bracket. Can you take us through that?
So we have a number of criteria that we evaluate as we're looking at team selection and seeding and so on and so forth. The one slight alteration in terms of the criteria is in past years, we've looked at non-conference wins and we've looked at conference wins. This year, we've just looked at overall wins or overall record, I should say. And that's basically, we've got some conferences now that are a little bit larger than they were in the past. And we just want to be able to evaluate, if you're beating good teams that are in the top, whatever net that you want to say is you're beating good teams, and evaluating that in the conference versus out of the conference is not as important when you have so many conference games for some of our conferences. And the other thing that I would say is just to give a shout out to women's basketball. The committee has really tried to have a focus with many of these leagues about playing tough competition out of conference. And even though we're looking at just overall record, and conference and non-conference isn't as important, many of the leagues do need to go out of conference to get some of those quad one and two wins that we talked about. So as an example, and we're talking about teams that are likely to be in the field, but just yesterday I was watching the Coretta Scott King Classic, and you saw out of conference UCLA playing Baylor, Maryland playing Texas. It's always good to see those top teams go against each other, even after they've gotten into conference play. And while many of those teams are likely to be in the tournament field, it's good to see them go against each other when it comes to seeding. We're not only evaluating teams to get into the field, but that high level out of conference head-to-head matchup, especially after teams have gotten their groove a little bit, they've just gotten into conference play, they kind of have their identity and know who they are. It's good to be able to see those teams play together. The one other thing that's a little bit new this year, Dave, from a committee perspective, I mentioned quads before. This is the first time the NCAA Women's Basketball Committee is looking at quads. We just looked at straight net rankings in the past, but one of the things we wanted to do was recognize that not all wins are created equal. So if you beat the number, let's call it 33 net team in the country, in previous years, that was looked at in a different way in terms of visually how the committee is able to look at that information, because that was not a top 25 net win. But if that number 33 team you beat is on the road, that may have more value than beating that team at home, and we feel that it does. And so looking at the quads instead of just the 1 through 25 net rankings, as we did in the past, have helped us just evaluate the true performance of the teams and look at that quality win on the road versus at home and even neutral site games as well. So those are a couple of changes that this year's committee is looking at.
So what is the difference between best and most deserving? How, how do you suss those two out?
Yeah, you really, that's where watching the games has to be a key part of what you do. Every month we send a list of the games that as a committee member that we've watched, because we want to hold each other accountable for evaluating with our eyes, not just simply looking at numbers. And it's hard to determine based solely on numbers, who's a better team. And you have to watch the games. And so if your charge is to find the best teams, you may have a team that's 30-4, you may have a team that's 18-16, but you have to watch those teams and try to trust your eyes along with the data. The data helps support what teams you're talking about. But if these two teams got on the court, which team has a better chance of being successful? Maybe based on their athleticism, their style of play, their discipline that they approach the game with. So that's what I look at in terms of best team versus most deserving. Some people say, well, you won your regular season, that makes you the most deserving team. But if you evaluate the teams based on what you see with your eyes, and you really don't think that that team that won their regular season at 30-4 is better than the team that maybe came in sixth in their league at 18-16, you've got to go with what you think is the best team.
Do you feel as though you trust your eyes more than the numbers?
That's a great question. I think a combination of both the numbers and your own evaluation helps you get to a decision that you can live with. Now, sometimes if I look at two teams play and team A has beaten team B twice, but the data says that the net ranking and all the other performance metrics of the team that's lost twice is better, then I'm just going to trust you got to trust your eyes. But I think it's a combination of both. But if you ask me which one do you trust more, I would say that I trust my eyes more. I think that you have to look at the data again to determine to almost validate what you're saying. But when you think about two teams, especially if they haven't played each other, playing each other, you've got to look at what they've done home and away. You've got to look at their efficiency in terms of, are they competitive with other good teams? Or are they not as competitive with really good teams? Take all those things into account and really watch the games and try to evaluate based on your experience as someone in athletics to determine which team that you think is the better team.
So I think we talk a lot about non-conference scheduling. You made mention of getting more quad one and quad two opportunities, but how does the committee deal with leagues that don't play a balanced schedule? So you might have a team, like you said, that wins 30 games, but maybe they duck to another one or two good teams in their league where someone else has to play the best teams in their league. How is that dealt with?
Yeah, it's definitely part of the conversation. We know that, especially from a conference perspective, you don't pick the teams that you play. So it's part of the conversation when we evaluate, hey, this team was 12-8 in league play versus a team being 14-6. One of the things that always comes up in the conversation is, yeah, but realize they didn't play, the two top teams in the league. One of the things that comes up on our team sheets is their conference strength of record. And so we're able to see, if X team played a really, really tough conference schedule and Y team had a better record, but it was a little bit more lenient in terms of the strength of that conference schedule, that information is there for us. And so we take all those things into consideration as we're evaluating things. But yeah, it's you would like for every league to play a balanced schedule, because of some of the sizes of the leagues, it's really just not possible unless you took some non-conference opportunities away. But we have all that information. That's all discussed in the committee room.
So speaking of things that aren't quite even, that could play a factor, Wofford has the best net of any SoCon team right now. And they have it despite the best player in the league, Rachel Rose, missing much of the season due to injuries. We cross our fingers. We hope that she comes back. She's able to play the last month of the season, plays well in the tournament. Wofford wins the tournament. Does their net really tell us how good they are? Because now they have back kind of an ace in the hole. How does that factor into seeding?
Well, great question. And one, we're rooting for Rachel to come back. What an outstanding player. She's had an amazing career, and we wish her the best. Us at Western Carolina played Wofford not too long ago, and I'll tell you what, they're still really, really good. They're one of those teams that I talked about that's got a lot of veteran leadership, and they do a great deal of distributing the ball, and different players on that team can beat you any given night. But one of the things that we do look at is injuries. The availability of talent is one of the criteria that we look at in terms of evaluating the different teams. But it all comes down to your net is certainly something that is evaluated as you're looking at those teams in terms of what those seeds are going to be, winning the tournament or not. But in this particular case, the committee will have enough data to go on what team is Wofford, because Rachel, if she comes back, that'd be outstanding for her. But Wofford has played a lot of games, and there's a lot of data points to look at what team is Wofford without her in the lineup. And without her in the lineup, so far they've shown that they're still a tremendous team who can beat anybody in our league, and I think could make some noise if they were the team that gets into the tournament. But we will have had enough information to know what type of team they are, because they've played so many games with the roster, the composition that they have now.
So it's a hypothetical situation, which means who knows? But what if she doesn't play the entire year? I mean, she's played a little bit, but essentially is out the rest of the year, but shows up in Asheville, plays well for 3 games, and now Wofford goes to the NCAA tournament. But their net essentially is indicative of who they are without her. But we know she's the best player in the league, and they're probably better than that. That's not necessarily fair to South Carolina or USC or someone like that, who is now facing her as a 15 seed. With her, maybe they would be a 13 seed.
And that's one reason why we don't just evaluate the teams and line them up when we're seeding them based on the net. Each committee member has different leagues that they're responsible for. And as the committee member that has the Southern Conference is reporting out, they should know that Rachel has not played the entire year. They still finished, wherever they finish in the league. And she came back for the conference tournament. She seemed like they didn't skip a beat. So while they didn't get a chance to raise their net, potentially because maybe they didn't win as many games as they would have won without her before the conference tournament, I think the information of really knowing the leagues, every league, not just the autonomy leagues, but every single league, and what those teams are dealing with, what they have in terms of their availability of talent. The conference liaisons have to be able to articulate that to the rest of the committee as the committee is making their decisions around seating.
What are the things between now and Selection Sunday that you're most focused on?
Yeah, I think, looking at some of those teams that may be from non-traditional multi-bid leagues that are still having really good years, and trying to determine, can a team from, you name the league, that is traditionally maybe a one-bid league, should they have a real chance at potentially getting an at-large bid if they don't win their conference tournament? Looking at some of those teams from deeper leagues and trying to determine, is it 8 teams that get in? Is the ninth place team better than that at-large 30-win really good team that I described before? So really trying to separate. We all have to be quote unquote experts on the specific leagues that we're liaison to, but really having a good idea of what are the teams that are in some of those larger leagues that are maybe that eighth, ninth place team in the league versus some of those, and I hate using this term, forgive me, mid-major leagues that have teams that just look like well-oiled machines. And if those two teams were to face off against each other in the tournament, who would have that best shot? Who do we really feel is like a better team? And so we're really depending on our colleagues around the committee to inform us on who are those teams. I'm doing the same thing right now. We have our first committee report out on Thursday of the different leagues that we're liaisons with, and trying to position all of our teams and keep them in the conversation at this early point in our discussions to make sure that if a team may not be doing as well right now, but maybe they have a nice run for the next 4 weeks getting to the tournament, we need to be able to make sure that our committee colleagues understand that this team, while their record may not reflect a team that should be in the discussion, we've watched them play and they're really, really good. And so making sure that those teams, those sort of what I call non-guaranteed fringe teams potentially, are in the conversation. So when we get to the selection room, it's not new news when one of those teams is made a run and either wins the tournament and we're thinking about where to seed them, or doesn't come up as a team that wins their tournament where we're still considering them for an at-large team. So we're looking at all those things right now.
Last question for you. Somebody is watching this. They're a coach, they're an administrator, they're a fan of a bubble team. It's clear they can play their way in, they can play their way out, but they're going to be right on that number. What can they do other than simply winning games the rest of the way to impress the committee?
You've got to win games, obviously. And what else you can do is you can look good in winning those games. Efficiency is a big part of the net. And when you think about, winning winning games, excuse me, in the fashion that you should, as a team that's gonna prove that they're a good team, efficiency is a big part of that. So yes, you need to win games, and yes, you need to look good winning those games. And I think that's the biggest thing that teams can do at this point. The last thing I guess I would say is that the non-conference, while you're not seeing a lot of non-conference matchups, when many teams get into this point in their season, they don't have a lot of opportunities to really improve their net. And so the conversations and the way that you handle your non-conference, and these are things that I mentioned earlier that we continue to talk about with our leagues with, you do have to try to challenge yourself in the non-conference. And women's basketball has done a tremendous job of that. But winning some of those games counts too. And now that we are considering quads that take into account home versus away, there's an opportunity to get some of those quad wins out of conference, and then there's more of an opportunity to get some of those quad wins in conference, where in some leagues you didn't have the ability to do that in the past. So, but a direct answer to your question, Dave, would be if I think I'm on the bubble, we certainly need to win, but we need to look really good doing it.
Alex, thanks so much. We'll catch up again sometime soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Take care.
Appreciate it.